Anyway, let's get started. So when I was on the show, one thing that came up was when it comes to meeting people, when it comes to interacting people, whether you're dating, in relationships, even with friendships, there's this whole thing about how people want to say, the people out here, there's a pee in the dating pool. There's no good men, there's no good women, all these generalized statements. And while I agree that there are people who are out here who are showing up and just showing up as their worst selves, and they're out here projecting their pain, they're doing certain things that just create an unpleasant experience when it comes to meeting people, there are also some things that I want all of us to consider. And one of those things that I shared was, you've got to look at how you're showing up. You have to look at the environments that you're in. You have to look at, what's happening on a consistent basis if you continue to get the same results. And that's one thing that I can preach till I'm blue in the face. And it seems like people don't want to take the time to sit back and acknowledge. And before we get into gender wars, tonight I'm talking to men and women, because I see this in both genders, where you are constantly doing something and you're expecting a different result, but when you don't get it, instead of saying, hey, maybe I'm a common denominator, you're pointing a finger to other people. So if you've experienced this, or somebody like this, let me know. Please let me know in the comments, so I'm not talking to myself tonight. But anyway, one thing that I want to bring up, well, the first thing I want to bring up, because I want to bring up a lot of different points, or several different points, is when you find that you are getting the same type of results, you're meeting the same type of people, you're always in the same dead-end relationships, you're missing the same red flags, you're going after, certain people, and it seems like it's the same relationship, but just a different face. What you need to reflect on is where you're coming from. And you might, in fact, be dating or choosing people or selecting people from your comfort zone. And you have to understand what that means. So your comfort zone, a lot of times, is determined by your experience through life. It's determined by what's happened in your past. A lot of times, this is when we're growing up or when we're teenagers, and it's embedded into our subconscious, right? So your subconscious mind is responsible for about 90% of your behavior. So think about how you show up every day. And I'm not just talking about relationships or dating right now, but just think about how you show up when it comes to your thoughts that you have, the feelings that you have, how you react, what you believe, your deep rooted beliefs. That's coming from your subconscious mindset, and that is created based on your experiences. So I'm just going to give an example. If you find that you are constantly dating someone who brings chaos, who's toxic, who brings confusion, they like to argue, they never come up with a solution, they're always, creating the extra when it doesn't have to be extra, that might be your subconscious place of comfort. And for you, that could be because all you've seen is dysfunction, and that's all you know. And what happens is when you're in those situations, there's things that happen within your brain. There's like dopamine hits that happen where maybe you don't like it. You're like, I don't like this, whatever. But because you have that dopamine, you become addicted to it to a certain extent, and that's what you seek out. So I see a lot of this in people who say things like, I try to date so-and-so, but the relationship was boring. There wasn't enough happening. There wasn't that spark. There wasn't that kick. And a lot of times that spark of those butterflies and stuff that you're looking for isn't passion. It isn't that loving chemistry. It's you're looking for that dopamine hit that you get when you have interactions with somebody who brings that chaos, right? That happens a lot also when you're with someone and you're dealing with breadcrumbing, or someone who's emotionally unavailable. So let's talk about attachment styles real quick. So you have relationship attachment styles. And two of the most common ones are anxious attachment and avoidant attachment, right? So anxious attachment, you need a lot of validation. You're looking for someone to remind you that you're important, that you're loved, that they're not cheating on you. And you need that. Sometimes people call you needy. When you are avoidant attachment, you run at the sight of somebody getting close to you. And so you avoid that closeness, you avoid relationships. A lot of times you call yourself the loner, or people tell you, you're not emotionally available. So if you've heard those things with avoidant or anxious, if you've heard those things with dealing with people, you may be avoidant or anxious. The goal is to become secure, and secure, you have a balance where you're not feeling that anxiety, you're not avoiding that healthiness, right? So here's the deal. A lot of anxious attachment will date avoidant attachment. Avoidant attachment, date anxious, right? When there's been research done about people with these, I don't want to call them disorders because it's not a disorder, but people who have these attachment styles, you don't see an avoidant dating an avoidant, right? Okay, so you always see avoidance dating anxious. You might see anxious going with someone who is secure, avoidant going with someone who's secure if they're able to work through, their internal challenges. But a lot of times you see anxious with avoidant. So think about it. You have someone who is not available emotionally. They avoid things. They run from stuff. You have someone who needs that validation, right? And you see this a lot in relationships where you have that person who's chasing someone who's trying to run from them. Well, why do they keep chasing them? There's an attachment that's happening because that avoidant person runs until they know that that person is starting to fade away. Then they turn back around. You can't see my hands. I got little hands with movements going. They turn back around, right? And they breadcrumb and they throw you a little snack. And then you're like, oh my God, or the anxious attachment person's like, oh my God, they do like me. Okay, I got this attention from them. And, it might last 10 minutes. It might last 10 days, 10 weeks, however long, but then they start running again, right? So you have that in and out, that hot and cold behavior. And what happens for that anxious person is they're getting those dopamine hits. They like those breadcrumbs, even though they need the whole daggone bakery. The fact that they're getting those breadcrumbs is creating these dopamine hits. And so they become attached to that. Well, that isn't something that's just born out of that relationship. That's because at some point in their life, that's what they experienced growing up. And it may be that their parent or caregiver was not emotionally available. So they had to try to get that attention from them. And when they got that attention from them, it felt good for that moment. So they were getting those dopamine hits. Well, fast forward to adulthood, that relationship with that avoidant person reminds them of that dopamine hit. So that's where that comfort zone comes in, because it's a reminder of how you function with how your emotions were addressed as a child. So that's what I mean when I say, when you're in these dysfunctional relationships or unhealthy relationships, dead-end relationships, and you find that you're in them over and over and over and over again, it might be because that's your comfort zone subconsciously. And that's when it's time for you to do some reflection to ask yourself, how are you showing up? How are you reacting? What are you doing to stay in this situation? Because you might very well be the common denominator, right? And so on the other flip side, for those who are avoidant, you were someone who experienced that neglect. And part of that experience was you now protect your heart. You don't trust people. You feel like people are going to let you down. And you were used to growing up not having anyone to emotionally connect with you. So when you have somebody that comes in that tries to connect with you, it taps into your vulnerability, which is a uncomfortable thing for you. Actually, it's really good, but you're not used to it. And you associate vulnerability with the pain you experience. You think it's one and the same when they're actually two different things. vulnerability doesn't cause pain. Sometimes you have pain, sometimes you're vulnerable, and they can go hand in hand, but they're not one and the same. But subconsciously, you associate vulnerability with pain, so you push that person away. And what happens is when you're interacting with someone who's secure, who's healthy, they're looking to connect with you on a healthy level. And for you, you're just like, oh, this is too scary, vulnerability, run away. Or because you're not having that chaos, or maybe that confusion, or even if it's someone who's anxious, they need something from you. So they're constantly asking you from it, and it's creating something in you that hits that dopamine there, where you feel like, oh, there's this passion, there's this chemistry, there's this high intense interaction. You think that they're boring if that doesn't exist. And the reality is, a lot of times those butterflies, that chemistry, it's your trauma speaking. So when people are saying, oh my gosh, I don't have any butterflies, there's no passion, I get bored, don't blame that person. Look at yourself, why, and ask the why questions, my 5 whys. Why are you getting bored? And then when you answer that question, ask yourself, well, why is that? And go through that 5 times, because a lot of times that boredom is peace that you say that you want, but you're not used to experiencing, and you don't know how to function within that peace. You only know how to function within dysfunction. And until you understand how to function in peace and understand that it's not boredom, that it's actually very relaxing and it's good for your nervous system, and you can actually have a very fulfilling, fun, and enjoyable time within peace, you're always going to think that it's boring. You're always going to think that someone's lacking passion. You're always going to think that, oh, you can't have anything unless you have chemistry or butterflies. So, that's something that is from your comfort zone that you have to do some reflection on. You have to ask yourself, how am I showing up? What are my patterns? Who are the people I've run from? What were they doing? Oh, they were all boring. Well, what made them boring, right? So you want to ask those questions. And I want you to also ask yourself, let's see, I got some notes here, because, I'll talk all night if I don't look at my notes. I was writing fast, can't read my handwriting. So the question that I do want you to also ask yourself is, what do you do? Like, okay, if you've never experienced a healthy relationship, right? If you don't know what a peaceful relationship is, if you've only experienced that toxicity, someone who's been clingy, someone who's been abusive, someone who's been just, they walk through the door and it's too quiet, so they have to create arguments. If you've only experienced that, then the question is, how do you know that you're experiencing a healthy relationship? Do you even know what one feels like? Do you know what it looks like? And that's something that you have to really get crystal clear on before you start looking, or you're going to end up choosing from a place of discomfort. Choosing from a place of comfort, which ultimately creates discomfort in your relationships. And then you're going to keep thinking the dating pool has pee in it. And while, someone is, dropping stuff up in there, there are people who are truly healthy and balanced, and you have to be able to recognize them and recognize when you yourself are having your own walls. They don't. That's right, Horace. They don't recognize these healthy relationships. So they label them as something that they're not. And that's the problem that I see, is a lot of people are unable to determine, what's good, what's bad, but then they keep staying in the same unhealthy pattern, the same cycle where you're getting this toxic relationship in. And that's one of the things that I do. Like, I'm going to be having a 5-day challenge at the first week of May, I believe. And that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about breaking those patterns and understanding, why do you keep showing up in these patterns? And a lot of it is deep rooted. It's in your subconscious. And that's why we have to work on mindset. What are your beliefs? Because I guarantee that if we were to start going through your beliefs, we look at how they're limited. When we start looking at your type or your preferences, we start understanding why you're in that cycle. And then when we lay all that out and we start looking at why do you have those beliefs? Why is that your preference? Who does this person remind you of in your past? And you start associating that person to, oh, that person reminds me of my family. And my family, my parents, my uncles, my aunts, my cousins, whatever, they were dysfunctional. Like everybody was always arguing. Everybody was always going at it. People were always having problems. That's my comfort zone. I made a post the other day and someone made a comment and said, relationships are hard. That's just how it is. And for me, I'm just like, yeah, a lot of people want to say that relationships are hard. Well, the reality is this. Healthy relationships have hard times. They have challenging times. Yes, but those hard times, those challenging times don't define the relationship. They aren't the majority of the relationship. They are moments within the relationship. And the goal is to work through those challenging times and get back on track. Hard relationships, difficult relationships, challenging relationships, your baseline is hard. Your baseline is challenging. I've been in one where majority of the time you're having a hard time. And if that's all you know, if that's all you've experienced, and that's what your mindset is going to be, relationships are hard. So you have to work on breaking that mindset, breaking those limiting beliefs, and work on creating a different experience. And that is done with intention, because you can't just wait for a healthy relationship to come your way. You can't wait for people to come at you and all of a sudden things are good. Healthy relationships are created, and it takes two people to create these relationships. So you have to do your inner work, and you have to make sure the other person that you interact with is doing their inner work, and you're coming together. So you're not having these hard relationships that you believe exist, right? So that's pretty much what I have to say. It's late. I don't have a whole lot. That's it for my notes. But what I want you to understand is this. If you find that you are in a very consistent pattern where you're in chaos, you're in confusion, you're in toxicity, or you're constantly with people who are emotionally unavailable, or you find that you're always chasing after someone, or you find that you can never find a relationship, you want a relationship, but then when they come your way, you always find something wrong with the person. You feel like they're boring. You feel like, there's no connection, and that's consistent. I want you to start doing some self-reflection and look at the common denominator, which is yourself, and understand this is not to criticize you. This is not to blame you, but this is to get you to start doing some inner work and understand that, wait a minute, there might be something going on for me where I'm choosing this pattern. I'm choosing this for a reason. And then, like I said, what I help people do is I help them get to the root of that reason. We do subconscious mindset reprogramming, because a lot of times those limiting beliefs, that subconscious mindset that's driving 90% of what you do, is at the wheel taking you through all kinds of left turns, and you're not going to start going straight and making right turns until you have some intentional efforts behind you. But you can't be intentional on doing things different if you have no idea, or if you have an unawareness that you're even making these subconscious decisions. So if you know that you're in a pattern, if you know that you feel stuck, you know that you keep ending up in these same situations, DM me. Like I said, I have a 5-day free challenge coming up first week of May. I would love for you to join. I don't have the link up yet. So if you listen to this video and you don't have the link, DM me. I'll send you the link because it's all available. I'll switch it up soon. But I want to help you. It's time to heal. It's time to break these patterns. And these patterns that are showing up in your relationships, they're also showing up in your professional life. They're also going to impact your money. If you're a business owner, it's going to show up in your business life. It's going to show up in your friendships. It's going to show up in just living your life. And you have to work on breaking these patterns. It's not just about relationships. It's about you living your most authentic life and being able to show up and experience that peace, that joy, and that happiness within yourself so that you can just live the rest of your years knowing that you're at peace, right? So, with all that being said, I want to wish you all lots of love, lots of peace, and many, many blessings. Have a good night.